Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
You're listening to Giles Brown on Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain. Child soldiers. You may not know this, but that 19.1% of the total population in the US is Hispanic, making it the largest racial or ethnic minority in the country. That means that a lot of Americans are going to be celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, which is taking place now between September the 15th and October the 15th. During this month, Colombian-born author Paula Delgado Kling is shedding light on child soldier issues. She's been on this station before talking about her book, her amazing book about Leonor, a former child soldier in Colombia, and she's written a new tome about this as well, about child soldiers. And I'd like to say that Paula joins us live on the line now. Paula, good afternoon from us. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure is all mine. It's really interesting, the number, because you're in Florida, aren't you? If my notes are correct.
I am in Florida. I'm in South Florida right now.
And lots of my friends go over to Miami and they go, good grief, we were over in Florida, especially in Miami, and we didn't speak English once. That's how big the Hispanic population is in certain areas of the States.
Yes, especially in South Florida.
So the question is, because we hear about child soldiers fighting in wars in Africa, horrendous situations, of course, and also in Asia. But the situation in Colombia, perhaps, and South America in general, it isn't so well known. We kind of know Colombia. A lot of people have come to it via narcos, and they all think that's all in the past. But there have been other groups that are in the jungles, in the hills there, because of the nature of the country. Give me Colombia, if you can, 101, and your relationship with it.
So Colombia is a very vast country with very different climates, very different vegetations throughout. Bogota is high up in the mountains, the Andes, which is very different from where Leonor lived, which was the jungle of Putumayo.
Right.
So jungles of Putumayo and the rural parts of the country, it's very desolate and isolated. Very few roads, very few infrastructures, hospitals, schools. So it's very fertile ground for the cocaine industry and the cocaine crops to crop up. So, for instance, in Leonor's hometown, which was Mocoa, there are very, very few actual jobs that are outside of the cocaine industry.
And of course, one of the main things was this: it wasn't a question of, because Colombia thankfully is now a stable place, a relatively stable place. It's got a great tourist industry, for example, in Cartagena, for example, and it's rebranding itself, even Medellin. But it's not a question where a lot of these very poor people, very poor farmers, they think, you know what, I think I'll grow cocaine or whatever, or the plants behind it. Basically, people rock up and say, you will do this, or otherwise you basically won't see another morning.
Yes, but aside even from you will do this, you won't see another morning. If they were to grow something else, it would be very hard to get tomatoes or oranges to markets because there are no roads or railroads or a way for them to, or ships in some way, the ports, to get their produce, legal produce, to a market. So here you've got low-skilled farmers. It grows naturally in the vegetation, the cocaine crops, and you've got, as you say, like narcos coming in and picking it up from you. So it's a win-win for them in that respect.
What's the situation? Because again, a lot of people don't know the politics of the region, and they will immediately think, okay, well, it was Escobar, it was the cartels, Cali, etc. But there is a nominally political group which has been operating in the inaccessible areas for a while, and that's the FARC. Now, explain what that is. They are left-wing, they are Maoist. Is it like Shining Path were in other parts of South America? Explain a little bit about their history.
So the FARC are the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. And that was the group that actually the girl I wrote about, Leonor, belonged to. They started out being a leftist, Marxist, but not exactly group. And then from there, it just grew into a drug gang. They did always say about bringing the government to the people and all of that Che Guevara, Castro kind of thing. But push comes to shove, they demobilized in 2016. These people, some people were given congressional seats as part of the peace process of 2016. But the FARC has since, the demobilized have rearmed themselves again and have become different sects of different groups that are again trafficking drugs.
Because they were never going to say, okay, well, the struggle's now over. We're going to sit down and I'm going to open a coffee shop or a library or whatever. Because there's a huge profit margin in this, and obviously they have the infrastructure to grow and to transport it, and they have the contacts. So therefore, that is the way that they keep going. But child soldiers. Because you wrote about this book, which was hugely well received. You've had experience with this yourself. Was it your brother who was kidnapped?
Yes. So, children, and I guess by the pure way that children can be manipulated or that they need money for their families, they are made to do the jobs of guarding hostages. So, yes, my brother, when I was in high school, was kidnapped and held hostage for 6 months. It wasn't by a formal group, but when he returned after 6 months, it's not that I knew much about what had happened to him because my family wasn't outspoken about it. My mother referred to it as the absence. But in the way that teenage girls are, I sort of heard tidbits here and there, and I was able to put together that the hostage takers, like the people who held him in a room for 6 months, were actually teenagers, in some way child soldiers.
So whereabouts was your brother? Was he adventuring in the mountains?
No, he was in his office in Bogota. He had just returned from studies abroad. It was his first job. It was in a startup, and I believe it was an engineering startup. And they came in, armed men that looked very professional, very kind of with army backgrounds, and they put everyone up against a wall, and they asked everyone to see IDs, and then they said, this one, this is the one, and they grabbed him, took him outside. He tried to hold on to an electrical post, and they rifle whipped him, and they put him in cars. Then they switched him to another car down the road somewhere, and then at another intersection, another car, and all of that. And within minutes or whatnot, he was in a room where he was held for the next 6 months.
And a lot of people were going, oh my goodness, this is awful. Why wasn't it on the national news? A very good friend of mine worked for an agency out there, and he's a large fellow, and his job was anti-kidnap. That was his trained role, very much like Proof of Life, if people have seen that film. It is a way that people raise money, and unfortunately in this time in Colombia, it's kind of become not an accepted thing, but it is a threat that happens.
It is. It's sadly enough, it's become kind of a DNA a little bit, because people don't have access to a lot of education, a lot of jobs, a lot of alternatives in some way. So in the case of Leonor's family, for instance, her brother, like he starts getting into kind of shady, dodgy things like being a mule for drug trafficking, then eventually gets the other little brother involved. It's like a network in order to survive in some way.
So, how did you first come across Leonor? Because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people doing this in Colombia. How do you make contact with her? I mean, how was her story? Did she come to you, or how did it all happen?
So I began this book when I was a graduate student at Columbia University many, 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 many moons ago. Okay, when I was 27, I am now 50 years old. I managed to get this book out. So when I was this ambitious 27-year-old grad student in international affairs and journalism at Columbia University in New York, I began this policy paper about child soldiers, about what happens to them, how are they reintegrated, what are the governments doing, what's the policy, how is the UN involved, the State Department, what are we doing about all these children? But I really couldn't find any information that was particular to Colombia. And I was very interested in Colombia because, of course, my family is from Colombia. So I finished grad school and I returned to Bogota in June of 2001. And I gained access to one of the government homes, the rehabilitation homes, the halfway homes, where these child soldiers were being kept. And from then on, I kept visiting the home, and that's where Leonor was living. And that's how we formed some sort of initial friendship in 2001. And we kept in touch through the years. I would return to Bogota wanting to know what had happened to her, to find out if I could do something else, whether it would be like an article or what was I going to do with all this information. And I kept finding out more and more information that revealed more of what she wanted me to know. It took a very, very long time for us to open up to each other and for her to tell me what had happened to her. In part, it was because she didn't know herself what had happened to her. She was very, very young. She started coming in and out of the FARC camps when she was 9, 10 years old. And she didn't formally join until maybe like 10, 11. It's hard also to know because she doesn't have an ID of when she was born.
Yeah. And I suppose the thing is, it's they have kind of been her family, if you like. How difficult is it for her to get away from there, to walk away from there? Because presumably, if you can't just rock up to the nearest, government soldier and say, "Hi there, I used to be in FARC," because they're going to say, "Oh yes, this way, please." I mean, this is a conflict that's claimed thousands of lives, and presumably, if she's got away from this situation, I mean, very few people do get away from that situation.
So through the years, she came back and forth from her home. Because you have to understand that her home is within FARC territory. And her uncles, her friends, her network of people are FARC. This is a FARC central town. This is like, I guess in the way that New York City, people are like, oh, do you work for Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, or Goldman Sachs? Over there, it's a little bit more, okay, so you belong to the FARC. What do? You've been in and out. Then she also had a lot of conflicts with her mother. So she wasn't really welcome at home to stay at home. So she would wander back and forth to the FARC camps to party because they offered them alcohol, they offered them drugs, they offered them a good time. And sadly, in the beginning years when she started going there, it was somewhat a place of refuge that she could sleep with people around her and that man weren't going to attack her. Whereas if she slept on the street, she was always really aware that man could rape her, essentially.
It's that macho thing, isn't it, that you get so much. I'm just thinking, I've done interviews with people in Mexico as well. Journalists have gone undercover. Okay, it's been cartels, it's been different, but they've said when people they used to get together and party because they knew their lives would be short. I mean, it might be him being a bit sort of journalese, but he said, we had these amazing parties, and it was all the sex, the drugs, and the rock and roll. I'm going to pose this very delicately, okay, Paula, and I'll use it in Russian army parlance, because during the Second World War, Russian generals had what they called field wives, who were women who were in the Soviet army, but were used by generals for relaxation, shall we say. Now, with Leonor or any woman in this situation, I know it's supposed to be a socialist Marxist thing, but are they seen as mules, as good for transporting drugs around the thing, or are they girls and women who you can party with? So
for Leonor, because she was very young, the commander who abused her, who essentially was her boyfriend or husband or compañero, was 34 years her senior. And she was very clear in explaining to me that for somebody who's a commander and exercises power, it was very much a status symbol to be with a very young girl like Leonor because she's pure and a virgin. So for these men, it's more about the virgins, I guess how it was with Pablo Escobar that we now know. It gave him a sort of status symbol in her purity, but it also gave her access to things that she could not have had otherwise, material things that she would ask him to get for her, like all teenage girls. She wanted clothes, she wanted makeup, she wanted lingerie, and he would get it for her. So it gave her a certain status within the group to have that. And between the young teenagers, the young women, there was always a battle, like almost like teenagers as well, as to who could get the more powerful one.
Yeah, indeed. Quite frightening, quite shocking. When you come to write something like this, I mean, the damage that this does to a country like Colombia, and people say, Giles, you've got to go to Colombia. It is the most beautiful country. I mean, it really is. They say do 2 days in Bogota, 3 days in Bogota, do 4 days in Medellin, and then just go up to Cartagena and enjoy the thing, because it is, it is beautiful, the whole thing, and the people are wonderful, and the food is quite something. But as a country, Colombia has gone through a trauma, but also the people themselves, as a nation, have gone through a trauma, but also the individuals. You cannot be a young girl going into adolescence, going into womanhood like she has, and not have deep scars.
Yes. So one term I learned through this book and a lot of the research is the term feminicide, in which a woman, a girl, is attacked simply because she's a girl. Now, perhaps it comes from the macho culture, but it also comes from the power that the man has to attack the girl. It comes from all genres of society, all stratas of society. You could be walking down a street in Bogota and a woman being attacked because she simply is vulnerable to an attack, or running in a park or whatnot. And writing Leonor's story taught me how vulnerable women are. Before she even reached the age of 20, she had been attacked multiple times.
That is the result of a male population. It's a mescla of things. It's a male population who have had no mal-educated. They've got very little education. They see women as status symbols, just going through that whole thing you were saying with the guy saying, I've got a virgin, whatever, 14-year-old girlfriend or whatever. And therefore, women are seen, and women are encouraged to project themselves in a way, especially in South America. You think about Venezuela, Colombia, or Brazil, where the women, you think of a Brazilian, you think of a curvy woman wearing very little. And the same with Colombia, the same with Venezuela. And that gets into the psyche of men, and they think that all women are fair game. And that is perhaps a problem until you start to educate girls and women and educate men that is not okay.
Well, astoundingly enough, the current president of Colombia last week referred to female journalists as the dolls of the mafia. And this is simply because they are very good journalists, very good women who are uncovering all these corruption scandals that his government has partaken in. So his defense is to attack the woman. And he himself is a former rebel from the M19, which was the group that caused a lot of chaos and damage in the 1980s. And it was astounding to hear from somebody occupying the highest post of government to refer to journalists, to the opposition, to women who are simply doing their jobs as dolls of the mafia.
Especially when you think about the way that women, especially female journalists, during the bad years were kidnapped, were abused, were killed. Journalism in Colombia in the 80s, I mean, on the left, on the right, they were just targets for everybody, especially high-profile women, because of that underlying sort of, we said, machismo and just maledicación. Let's move away from that, because I know that we're going to be here for another 3 hours about this in particular. But I'm talking to you during Hispanic Heritage Month, and they're obviously in the States. It's an interesting situation at the moment. I'm not going to get drawn down that rabbit hole either, but an awful lot for the Hispanic society to be proud of. Hardworking, 19% of the population. I've got friends in, I said, Miami, New York, Los Angeles, obviously, and there's a vibrant situation there. A lot to be proud of. But at the same, the Hispanic community should celebrate the whole thing and have these wonderful, be joyful in the States, but also have a reality check and see what can be done, back in front in the homeland. Is that perhaps why you're bringing this particular subject to light at this particular moment?
Yes, I do. And if you think about it, even around the Miami area, the people who will probably be celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, like they come from Cuba, Venezuela, and it's similar circumstances to perhaps what we should highlight that brought us to America, that forced a lot of people to leave their countries. Your listeners might have heard of the people traveling through the Darien Gap and how insane the situation is for them, that they risk bringing young children, toddlers, through mud, through swamps, through diseases, all of these things in order just to try to reach something else that brings them opportunities.
What are you hoping that people are going to A, think about this month, and B, obviously, if they have gone that, because your book was voted one of the best non-fiction books of this year by Elle magazine. So what are you hoping that people will take from Leonor for a start, and generally you putting this particular issue in the spotlight?
So if Leonor and I, who are women from completely opposing worlds, it was interesting when we first met that I'm a white, blue-eyed woman from Bogota, and I have an accent from Bogota, and she is a former guerrilla. She is from Putumayo. Her accent was very different. Our backgrounds are insanely polar, but we were still able to talk and communicate and bond as women. So if she and I could, then there's a chance that there can be peace. She wants peace for her children. I want peace for my children. Somehow, as women, perhaps there can be avenues that can be created. And if you think about it, the women are really the ones left behind in the wars to rebuild their communities. And they're the ones raising the children and instilling the values in the next generation of children. In places like Colombia, and with Leonor's family as well, they are not raised with a father figure.
Absolutely. The fathers are kind of off there being whatever. If people want to find out more information about you, I know there's a website. Where can people keep up to date with what's happening in your world, Paula?
So I'm on Instagram for anyone who wants to reach out. It's at Paula Delgado Kling, and also through my website, pauladelgadokling.com.
The book, if you want to check it out, you can order it via our own virtual bookstore. The book is called Leonor. I advise you to read it. It's a fascinating tale about a truly wonderful country and wonderful people as well. Paula Delgado Kling, it's been a real pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.